Welcome everyone to this hybrid event arranged by the IET's Angling Coastal Local Network, which represents members in North Essex, Norfolk and Suffolk. Welcome to those of you here in the audience at the atrium at the University of Suffolk. Welcome also to folks joining us online via Teams from other parts of the UK and indeed globally. I'm Kevin Foster and I chair the Angling Coastal IET Local Network, and I'll be your host for this evening. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, Simon Lavington. Simon is Emeritus Professor of Computer Science at the University of Essex. He graduated from Manchester University and has worked on high-performance computer architectures for knowledge-based systems. He's a Fellow of the IET and BCS and is the Digital Archivist for the Computer Conservation Society. He's published many books and journal papers, to which he refers to as they're gathering dust now. Simon retired in 2002 and pursues computer history as a hobby. So Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I'm going to talk about a remarkable lady. And first of all, here's the agenda for the talk. An introduction to Dina herself and also to the company where she learnt to program and won her spurs, as it were, Elliott Automation. She worked at the Boreham Wood Research Laboratory in Hertfordshire, and I'll go on to discuss a couple of interesting projects that are interesting to me, and I think even at the time they were novel projects, and Dina certainly achieved some notoriety and excellence in them. She left the company because she had a concept of a need in the marketplace for what we would now call a software house, and her company was called VPS, and I shall discuss some of its achievements and why it was a pioneering company. I'd then like to set Dina's life in the context of other women programmers, concentrating on the first decade of general purpose stored program electronic computers. So this is computers as distinct from analog computers or distinct from electromechanical desktop calculations and that sort of thing. And for me, it was important to recognize people who actually created something. They wrote code, they debugged code, they produced programs that were of use. And in the wider sense of human endeavor, they created things. So on with the first slides then, and Dina herself. Her father, she was born Aldrina Vaughan. Her father was the only one who called her Aldrina. Everybody else called her Dina, and one senses that there was a little, shall I say, friction between her father and herself. She insisted on leaving school at 16, much to the annoyance of her father, but she undertook to study part-time and got a London external degree in maths, but found that her company, she was working for the British Iron and Steel Research Association, she found that that organisation was indifferent to her degree, didn't give her a rise, didn't give her a promotion. So when she saw an advert for a programmer with the Elliott Automation company, she applied and got it. There are two projects of interest that I'm going to describe, where Dina took a key part. One of them was the Elliott 153, a classified project, and the other a business data processing computer. As I said, Dina had some ideas for her own company. She identified the market need, and she founded a company called Vaughan Programming Systems, VPS, and we shall talk about that. It's the highlights, technical highlights of the company, and its successes. And then, as I say, the wider context, diversity of the living programs. So what of this first project, the Elliott 153? The computer itself is in the center, and as is traditional, you have the central processing unit, some RAM, and some backing store, a disk. The DTN signals coming in from the left are from the government defence teleprinter network, and the 153 computer takes information from that network and spits it out to that network, and the information on which it is acting are messages from listening stations. Remember, this is the Cold War. Allied listening stations detecting enemy transmissions, and the question was, what is the location of these transmissions? So the DF computer was to find the locations. More about that in a little bit. But the computer itself, a giant 30-foot wide, water-cooled, containing over 2,000 thermonic valves, tubes, and consuming over 9 kilowatts of power, powered actually by a bank of submarine accumulators, submarine batteries, which gave some isolation from fluctuations in the mains. And the job of this computer was to get a best fix by triangulation, etc., on data coming in from several listening stations worldwide. And we understand that at the height of the Cold War, there were typically over 200 of these fixes required per 24 hours. Now, before the computer came along, the Admiralty's research lab, and you can see the initials ARL above the computer's consoles. The people in the Admiralty research lab laboriously got out their charts and their parallel rules and plotted the signal directions, etc., and took about 20 minutes to get a fix. This machine did the job in rather less time, 10 seconds. Internally, the computer consisted of sub-miniature pentodes on what those in that time was a rather innovative printed circuit board package technology. But I want to spend a little time not on the technology, but on the software aspects, which you'll see in the blue panel at the bottom there. The data word for the computer was 16 bits, and 4 16-bit quantities went to make each instruction. So quite a long instruction, and that, coupled with the fact that the architecture of the machine was arranged as 7 multiplexed internal highways, meant that there was a certain amount of opportunity for functional parallelism within a single instruction. And typically, at least, rather than typically, it was found that one of these long 64-bit instructions could do the job of perhaps up to 4 instructions in a conventional machine of the time. So complicated to program, and there's an emphasis on speed. So the job that Dina had to do in writing the code was quite critical. After the 153 project, Dina was employed in other software team efforts, particularly at that time the IET company was producing smaller, robust, more reliable computers that would sit on the shop floor in a factory, and the company got into industrial automation, and one of the areas that they were first into was steel mills. So Dina took some hand in that kind of activity, but the next project for which Dina had a particular and major responsibility was something rather different. It was Elliott's first foray into business data processing, where there were volumes of character type data rather than mathematical and engineering calculations. So let's go on to discuss the Elliott 405 computer. There is a smaller installation, I have to say, and you can't see the magnetic tape decks in that picture. And the emphasis on that architecture of the machine was in providing hardware for a certain amount of autonomous support for operations like character conversion, which would otherwise be done by software. So when we look at the architecture, we see that both on the input and output side, there are little boxes labeled D to B and B to D. That's decimal to binary and binary to decimal. So there was a certain amount of autonomous activity that could go on in those boxes at the same time as the CPU was doing its stuff, and also maybe there would be autonomous, semi-autonomous transfers to the backing stores or to the magnetic tape units. So again, a rather complex setup for which to write programs. Here is the first production version of the Elliott 405, the first one to be delivered to the Norwich City Council. And you can see Dina there, and a sign of her importance on the occasion is the fact that the man by her right hand shoulder is Sir Leon Bagrit, the boss of the Elliott company. So in a way, you could say that Dina's excellence as a programmer had some public airing. Well, we're now in about 1958. Dina was having, as it were, wider thoughts. But before going on to those wider thoughts, just let me pause and give you three quotations from three fellow programmers at the time that give some indication of how she was regarded in her profession. And the one I like is the third one, a physical arrangement for writing programs. She wrote with a Parker 51 fountain pen, black ink, on drafting paper, where if you made a mistake, the only way of erasing what you put on the paper was with a razor blade. So clearly there was some incentive for only writing an instruction that you thought about first. And as it says here, and this is one of her colleagues quoting, whereas the rest of us tested programs to find the faults, she tested them to demonstrate that they worked. So that is Dina, the skilled programmer, and this is what she saw. She realized that computer manufacturers at that time, they were supplying the hardware, but very little software to go with the hardware. So that companies who found themselves in a fit of enthusiasm buying one of these newfangled machines were having difficulty in implementing their applications on their machines because they didn't have programmer skills, and in any case there was a national shortage of skilled programmers. So the solution was to create an independent software house, which Dina called Vaughan Programming Services, VPS, and that would fulfill the need. So a little bit about VPS, the company. It was founded in the traditional way on the dining room table by Dina in her house in Brickenhill, Hertfordshire. And I put a note there about another programmer who also founded a company at that time, and we should mention more about Steve Shirley in a moment. I'll just let you read the slide while I take a sip of water. So the company was established, and in the center there, in the blue text, I've got a quote from the company's official document of formal registration, and you can see the focus of its speciality by then, and this was a few years after the informal start of the company. This is when official registration was happening, and by then the company had become experts not only in software but in hardware, and something of that I'll talk about later. By the end of the 70s, the company had converted an old Mortings in Hertfordshire and Ware in Hertfordshire, and the payroll was soon reaching 100. So let me show you a picture of the Mortings. And two particular people of interest, clearly Dina in the foreground there. The person highlighted on the right there is her husband, Dina St Johnston. Now he was the director of Elliott's computing division, and you can see that one of the reasons why Dina left the company when she married Andrew in the summer of 1958 was that it became slightly awkward for husband and wife to be in the same proximity. But Andrew stayed on in the company as director until ICL was formed, and you may remember that ICL was the government's plan to amalgamate all the original UK hardware companies into one main organisation. Andrew felt that he was not given a sufficiently senior position in ICL, and he decided to leave and join his wife, and was very happy to do so. So a couple of innovations that tickled me at any rate. One of them was early on, the company designed and implemented its own portable operating system. And they did that because one of the first large projects they tackled was a contract to program the control software for the Windscale or Sellafield nuclear plant. And the task was to handle over 400 input and output signals, most of them in real time, signals ensuring the safety of the nuclear reactor. So quite critical real-time software. And it was became clear to Dina that the software of the controlling computer had to be based on a sensible and appropriate operating system. Some years later, they decided to complement this by designing their own mini computer. And one of the engineers in the company, Jeff Monk, designed the Vaughan 4M, which used commodity microprocessor chipsets, as often people did in those days. Of interest was the wide range of analog and digital input-output modules that was available for the Vaughan 4M. And each of the modules was optically isolated from the main system. And of course, some kind of isolation could be critical in an industrial and well, nuclear certainly situation. There is the 4M, and if you go to the National Museum of Computing at Bletchley Park, you'll see one of these, size of a large wardrobe, you might say. So the breadth of the VPS projects, the applications as the years went by tended to be the real-time systems, but also embraced the normal thing that you would expect a software house to do, survey analysis, compiler writing, and that sort of thing. The clients, well, the computer manufacturers, government departments, defense organizations, utility companies, a wide range of companies, and the platforms, the computers for which VPS people wrote software, included, of course, their own Vaughan 4M, but also the computers from Elliott Automation, Ferranti, IBM, etc. The hardware of the day, you might say. So let's widen the discussion and think a bit about Dina herself. So far, I've kind of presented her with rose-tinted glasses, but we should ask the question, was she in any sense unique? How did she compare with other women computer programmers of the first decade of general purpose computers, say 1949 to 59. So let's have a look at diversity. I'll start with the computer manufacturing industries and the users of those machines. And I've divided the jobs that these women did under three headings. First of all, working in government establishments and universities, then the computer hardware manufacturers themselves, and then the end users other than category A. And these are the figures that so far I have been able to identify. And I must say, when I set out on this quest, oh, I don't know, 6-9 months ago, I was surprised that there were more than 20 or so women programmers, and my collection is now up to about 60, and that for me has been intriguing and amazing. I should just make a comment on category C, and point out that in the early days of computer delivery, a lot of the machines went to government-funded establishments, and it's not surprising that the other sort of, as it were, civilian organisations are a bit slow off the mark, and therefore it has been difficult to identify programmers from that period. Let's concentrate on computer industry for the moment and take a snapshot at the year when Dina herself started to program. At that time, there were 5 companies in the UK manufacturing computers. There they are listed. The last company is the Lions Tea Shop Company. I'll tell you about that if you're interested. But for now, all we need to know is that it eventually started to manufacture and market computers along with the other 4. First in the field to deliver a product was Ferranti, so it's not surprising that at this snapshot date of 1953, Ferranti had the largest software team, and it's also intriguing that they had quite a large number of women in their team percentage-wise, and not, however, as high as BTM, which had all women at that time. Now that's actually a special year because 1953 was the year in which BTM first recruited any programmers, and it happened that they were all women on that in that year. And I suppose we could conclude, as a rough average, that in the early 1950s, one would expect women to perhaps constitute 40 or so % of any given software team. And I have a feeling that that figure is quite high compared with what followed in subsequent years. Getting accurate figures, statistics, is hard. The one I've come across was a survey, quite a comprehensive survey done in Australia in 1965, where the Australian government surveyed about 250 companies in the electronic data processing business, and they had a look at a total of about 2,500 people to do with computers, occupying many jobs, obviously data processing clerks as well as programmers, etc., etc. But on the particular category of programmer in Australia in 1965, about 18% of the teams were female. I'd like to conclude this talk by giving you 4 stories, little potted life histories of one woman each from 3 of the categories A, B, and C, and then finally Audrey Clayton, who during her lifetime moved across all 3 categories, A, B, and then C. And you can see I've summarized in a single word the companies, the organizations for which these people work. So let's start with Mavis Hines. Mavis got a maths degree in London University, graduating in 1950, and early in 1951, she joined the Met Office and was assigned to the Met Office's research division, particularly the group dealing with what's called numerical weather prediction, NWP, where the team was developing mathematical models which would divide the area, the forecast area, which might be the British Isles, Northern Europe, divide it into a grid of points, and for each point collect data on temperature, pressure, humidity, all those sorts of things, and end up with a huge array or matrix of values that had to be processed according to fairly complex formulae. And indeed, this whole numerical weather forecasting task was computationally very intense, very demanding. And in the early days, of course, there weren't any computers. There were just desk calculators. And it was impossible in practical terms to produce any operational forecasts. But by the early 1950s, electronic computers were coming along, and so advances were made. Now, the Met Office didn't have its own computer, and so it sort of begged and hired time on other people's computers. And indeed, from end of 1951, for 2 or 3 years, the Met Office staff, particularly Mavis Hines, used the Lions Leo computer. Then from 1954, they moved on to a Ferranti Mark I computer installed in the electrical engineering department at Manchester University, which they had to use at night. They booked time on this machine. They were one of many users, and they got the night shift. And Mavis has written a very interesting personal account of life at night in Manchester in those days. The Met Office finally got its own computer in 1959, a Ferranti Mercury computer, and all the time the emphasis was on buying time on, or buying for themselves, the most powerful computer available at the time. Now, Mavis was central to the team producing the UK's first operational computer weather forecast in November 1965. I'm not sure whether this is a world first or not. Certainly the Met Office was very proud of that forecast, and it was presented at a public gathering. And as a result of that and similar work, Mavis her name is held in high esteem in Met Office circles, and Mavis is on the list of names to be given to storms. So in due course, we shall be assailed by a storm called Mavis. Mavis herself never married. She stayed in the Met Office until her retirement in 1989. The next person is Joan Travis, who started life in a kind of dramatic way by being born during a snowstorm on an isolated hill farm in Yorkshire to rather humble parents. Joan herself was quite shy, but she turned out to be very good at maths at school. She went to grammar school and she got a place to do maths at Birmingham University. But the family were too poor to support her in her student days, and so she went to Huddersfield Tech and got a London external degree in maths and physics, a first-class degree, and in due course joined Ferranti's programming department in April 1953. And since I've mentioned Ferranti before and the number of women employed by the company, let me describe the physical sort of place where Joan found that she was working. It was in Ferranti's Moston factory to the north of Manchester. And if you're envisaging dark satanic mills, you got it right. Brick soot-covered building, etc., etc. But Ferranti realized that it was just not appropriate to have programmers sort of in an engineering production line factory environment. So in a grass lawn in front of their Boston factory, they erected a special building. This was at a time of wartime, post-war shortages, and it became convenient to make use of a prefab, a temporary building. This one was clad in aluminium sheets on a metal frame, and was a design that was intended for things like primary schools just after the war. So the building that Joan found herself in had two large communal rooms. One room held design engineers and the other programmers. And then there were four offices in the middle and separate male and female loos. And the whole thing was in a light, airy premises. So a little sort of sanctuary among the dark satanic mills. And the women, it's not surprising that the women there got on very well. The company sort of made a set at recruiting women for a number of reasons. If you were cynical, you'd say that, well, women were cheaper than men, which regrettably was the case throughout industry in those days, although that was to change, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But Ferranti and many other science and engineering organizations that had calculations to perform found that women were generally more precise, more careful, more patient, better at coding than men. On the business of salaries, one of Joan's colleagues, a lady called Mary Lee Berners-Lee, and yes, the mother of Tim Berners-Lee, she was at Boston at the same time, and Mary Lee shared a flat with a woman who worked in the personnel department at Ferranti, and they got to discussing salaries and realised the discrepancy and made a fuss. And Ferranti was one of the first companies to right the wrong and give equal salaries to men and women. So what did Joan do in her programming life? She became interested in the boundary between hardware and software, and found herself acting, as she describes it, as a kind of plumber's mate. She joined an engineering team, particularly teams that were developing new devices exotic peripherals, and was with them by their side when commissioning this new hardware. For anyone who has commissioned experimental hardware, you'll realize that finding faults is sometimes quite difficult, and there is a requirement for the production of small loops of test program, loops that would allow repetitive signals to appear on oscilloscopes, etc., etc. An interesting and rather specialist field, test programs and acceptance tests. And that's where Joan found interest. And time and again, she was the only woman in a group of men, and indeed travelled to some exotic places installing computers and peripherals, Amsterdam, Rome, Stockholm, etc. She moved to Ferranti premises in Berkshire, Bracknell. She married and had 2 children and worked part-time for Ferranti during the looking after the children, and then returned to full-time work. And after many years with Ferranti, which turned into ICL, which turned into ICT and ICL, she eventually was made redundant in 1989, by which time she has become a senior programmer in ICL's research department. And now for something completely different, Anne Moffat. And here is a posed photo for the cover of her autobiography. Now, Anne, in contrast, left school at 16, intending to study part-time, but she had a rather serious bike accident, which put paid to those plans. But she recovered from her injuries and joined the Kodak company. And in 1959 was sent by Kodak on a computer programming course at Ferranti's London Computer Centre. And she was a natural programmer. She immediately knew that this is what she wanted to do, and was doing some really good stuff for the Kodak company, such that when Anne got married, although it was the custom at the time largely for women to leave work once they were married, Anne was one of only 4 programmers employed by Kodak. She was very valuable to the company, and so they not only enabled her to stay on part-time, but also promoted her. And as she says, she found herself promoted to a level normally occupied by males with university degrees. So clearly she has become a very skilled and valuable programmer. Another sign of how important for Kodak regarded her work was in 1963, when Ferranti was struggling to commission the operating system for their Atlas computer. Atlas, the UK's first supercomputer, that was being commissioned in Manchester, and Ferranti invited 2 or 3 companies, computer user companies, to send a person each to Manchester to be guinea pigs to run their applications on the supercomputer and help debug it was called the supervisor, the operating system. And if you know anything about operating systems, you'll be familiar with virtual memory. Well, Atlas was the first system to implement virtual memory. And particularly the programs being developed by Anne formed one of the set of tests for what was called the Drum Learning Program, a program that tried to optimize page transfers between the RAM primary store and the Drum backing store. And progressed, as I say, she got married, then she got divorced, she got married again, changed jobs, and continued to achieve great things until she was headhunted in 1973 by a large Australian company and went to live in Australia and continued to work on software and databases. And by 2002, she had been inducted into Australia's Hall of Computing Fame, Computing Hall of Fame. And as a final accolade, as it were, in 2006, she was awarded an honorary PhD. And I'm happy to say that she's still living in retirement. And I suppose, to coin a word, she is a feisty woman. She really went places despite a serious bike accident and no degree. So finally, for something completely different, Audrey Clayton. Now, Audrey graduated with a first-class maths degree from Manchester in 1949 and became Alan Turing's first research student. So there she was doing an MSc on the Manchester Mark I computer. The title of her thesis was on the mechanical solution of a problem in Church's lambda calculus. Forgive me if I don't explain what that is. Suffice it to say that the maths department at Manchester at that time was rather keen to use the new computer to explore problems and hypotheses in pure maths, things like Mersenne numbers, the Riemann-Zeta hypothesis, that sort of thing. And Audrey was one of 2 or 3 people working in that field. In fact, actually, if you look at her thesis, quite a bit of the thesis consists of her writing library routines for this early computer. So she found herself implementing software utilities as well as tackling this problem in pure mathematics. After an MSc, she left the university. Why? Well, she told me that she was put off by the professor of mathematics, Max Newman, who said, "Oh no, Miss Bates, nobody will ever get a PhD in computing." And so she left and joined Ferranti's Boston factory and programmed in the group that contained Mary Berners-Lee and Joan and all the other Ferranti women programmers. When Ferranti delivered their second Mark I computer to Canada, to University of Toronto, Audrey was seconded to Toronto to help that university establish its software setup. Audrey stayed on in Canada and married a Canadian engineer, and soon they were off to California, wouldn't you know, and she joined a computer manufacturing company. She married, had twins, divorced, had 2 more children, spent some time working part-time, bringing up children, returned to work, and ended up finally as working as a systems analyst for the US government. So, from Turing's research student on a rather esoteric and refined pure maths problems, here is somebody who contributed to more practical things. So let's begin to wind up this talk. Back to Dina. I mentioned briefly Dame Stephanie or Steve Shirley, who founded a successful company shortly after Dina founded a successful company. But there was a difference. Steve was essentially, as she herself described, woman-oriented, making jobs suit people rather than the other way around. And the reason for this is not hard to find. If you, she's been interviewed on many occasions, and if you read those, if you look at those interviews, you can see that regrettably, she had a hard time in industry working for companies which, frankly, as we would now say, did not treat women very well. So she had a hard time in getting her talents recognized, and indeed on other rather regrettable things that males do or used to do and hopefully don't do now. And that was a driver for her to found her own company, which had certainly at the outset only employed women, and particularly women who found themselves only able to work at home. And her company thrived, and numerically it became much larger indeed. And Dina's company, Dina in contrast, as we have indicated, was much more business orientated and eventually focused on a particular market and a particular need. So this is 2 quite different stories, quite different companies, but both women, I would suggest, were leaders in their chosen field. So really, that's it. Let's wind up this gig and leave you with some references if you wish to follow on the life of Dina. And may I invite some questions?
Thanks very much, Simon, for a fascinating insight into some fascinating ladies. For those online, if you've got a question, please use the Q&A facility in Teams. At the moment, I don't see there's any questions, so please get your thinking caps on. So we'll start off by taking a question or 2 from those in the atrium here at the University of Suffolk. Who would like to ask the first question? Go ahead. Do shout so the mic.
Thanks for the talk. I was just interested to know if you ever met Dina.
Yes.
You did. How did you?
I did. Which is why I'm not afraid to use the word formidable. There was one particular tale. She helped me, by the way, and her husband, when I was writing a book about Elliott automation. And I remember one meeting we had in Southwold in Suffolk. So myself and 1 or 2 other Elliott pioneers, former employees, assembled in dear old Southwold. And Dina had to drive there from Hertfordshire, and not a convenient, particularly convenient journey. Now, Dina had a Jaguar at those times, and she was in her 70s. And I remember when she arrived, I said, "Oh, Dina, did you have a fearsome journey? I hope you had a stop She says, nonsense, I drove there directly as fast as I could. So that was Dina.
Fantastic. Is there a question online?
I think
I don't have any. I'll ask a question.
Okay, go ahead, George.
Simon, thanks for the talk. I really enjoyed that. Just to take me back into some of my history, although I was a bit later on than that one. Could you say something about the impact that universities might have had in changing the balance of computer programmers from the largest numbers of females in the early years to what seems to be a very, very male-dominated field at this point?
I think that's not a question I can really answer, but I'll give you one fact. The first UK undergraduate course in computer science was at Manchester, took its first students in 1965. There were 26, intake of 26, so quite small, and 5 of those were women. So a relatively, appreciable percentage, but the percentage of women in Manchester courses went wobbly and then went down in the subsequent years. Why is that? It's curious, isn't it? Because we're talking mostly about software rather than hardware. So we're not talking so much about rude mechanicals. Nevertheless, I think the boys at school generally put off the girls at school. That's one way of looking at it. And incidentally, in this investigation I've been obsessed with the last year, women programmers, I also was looking for women computer engineers, and there aren't a lot. The first one that I have identified was right at the end of my self-imposed decade in 1959. A Cambridge engineering graduate joined the Lions Leo company, working on some hardware for their production machine. So that's 1959. The only one of these 60 odd people I'd found who was an engineer. And the second one I've come across was somebody who graduated from the first year in Manchester, graduated in '68. So they're few and far between. That doesn't really answer your question, I'm sorry. But did you have your hand up?
Well, I was going to ask a similar question, and if I may offer anecdotal evidence for which I have no statistics, the cohort that for my degree in the sort of early mid 80s was much higher in percentage terms of women, and I get the impression that it's an impression that we then had the Sinclairs and the Amstrads and all that sort of stuff. The dads played with these basically rubbish computers with their boys, with silly games that girls at the time, women at the time, would have gone, what is the point with that? You know, they're all really quite bad. That then, so I think that was a big turn off to a lot of women from studying it, because they looked at what computers were being used for, and it was these nap game things mainly. We then had the ICT policy, where what was taught at school was not programming, it was how to use Word and Excel and PowerPoint. And I think those have caused a decline in the number of women. That's a anecdotal.
I think what we really should do, with due respect, there are two females in this audience. I don't want to put you on the spot, ladies, but we really ought to have a comment of some sort. My wife, this is my wife, brother.
From the perspective of being around in the 60s, what you have to remember, two things. which weren't peculiar to universities specifically, but there was an absolute expectation that if women married, they had to give up their professional jobs. Full stop. The very first woman at Manchester University to actually stay in post after she got married was somewhere in the 70s in the law department. And she was able to bring, I suppose, equality notions to that. But the second thing is that in the 60s, women were expected to marry. So you have two significant sociological reasons why women were squeezed out. And of course, the other thing is when men got the hang of programming, of course, there wasn't any chance anyhow.
Thank you, Rosalind.
Thank you.
I was,
That's mine.
with due respect, I'm going to get some stick afterwards. I really was going to ask these two good people here for comment.
Well, I'm not sure, but still, I graduated like 4 years ago, but it's still quite male dominant because I did engineering, well, partially electrical and computer. I'm not sure, but I think maybe there's some reasons, partially like boys from young age, they get into gaming, and you don't see many girls, well, be into that kind of techie or gaming stuff. And just growing up, yeah, I think it's just continues, and yeah. It's mostly boys that prefer to do jobs like that. Yeah.
So it's computer gaming is.
I think yes. But,
yes.
Yeah, early
one of
ages.
the culprits. Yes. Well, yes. You could be right. I don't play computer games, I must say, but no, I'm too old for that. Yeah. Yeah.
So another question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wondered if there was any relationship between the number of people that came out of Bletchley Park women code analysis work, and also from my wife's family side, what her aunt calls cypher schools, number 2, 3, 4, or whatever it were, and got letters in the family written 1944 around that sort of year, saying, "Oh, I was taught to solder to maintain these machines and things like that," but they didn't provide a source of people with this attention to detail, understanding some of the early computer machines.
Well, it's very interesting that because it would appear to be a sort of obvious in a way, but largely I don't think it happened. I've only come across one woman, one of the BTM ladies, who worked as not as a cryptanalyst, but as an operator of punch card machines. I mean, Bletchley Park did. There was a huge activity there, including a lot of analysis, traffic analysis, etc., which wasn't coding as such, but was data processing by electromechanical punch cards. And this particular lady, forget her name, she did that sort of thing during the latter stages of the war. That's the only one I've come across. But I would say that not only in classified things like Bletchley Park, but throughout science and engineering activities in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, there was a need to process numerical data. And before general purpose computers came along, a large aerospace company, for example, would employ a kind of room full of, well, they weren't called computer clerks. The job title was computer. And these were mostly women who would sit with desk calculators and crunch numbers produced by the aerodynamic engineers to the the efficiency of aerofoil sections, etc. And the reason why women were employed largely for this task is not only cynically because they were somewhat cheaper, but more importantly, women were found to be more accurate, more patient, more precise, and they fulfilled that particular job of tedious calculation much more successfully than men. Now, did any of those then become programmers? I know of one case particularly in Shell's Amsterdam laboratory, where one of these female computers were really enthusiastic when Shell got a computer, and she realized that her statistical calculations could be done faster, and indeed insisted that she'd been given a chance to learn programming. And eventually, she company that she would like to run courses for the fellow scientists. The first person that they got running a course at Shell was an outside academic who, by all accounts, was trying to run a computer programming course without any practical work associated. So this particular woman, called Liddy, rose from being an operator of desk machines to being a very valuable educator of programmers within the Shell organization.
Thank you. Let's take a question from the online community, please.
I have a statement, as it were, from Wendy Mitchell, who's very enthusiastic about the area. And she says that she has been involved in computing since the early 1980s. The ratio of women hasn't really changed much at all. Since 2025, she's a STEM ambassador, trying to promote females joining the computing industry and doing part of it via the Lego League. And she's been a programmer and involved in testing, and is now an SQL DBA for the National Health Service. So a positive affirmation, wants to promote more women. I'm sure Wendy feels, as I do, that women have got a lot to offer programming teams.
Well, of course, yes. Well done. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question from the atrium here.
First of all,
Excuse me. Unfortunately, our son is rather ill at the moment, but no, I can't answer it. Carry on.
I was going to say two things. One is my first foray with any computing was an Elliott 803, so
yes,
rather after your machines.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, what sort of language was she programming in? Was it literally noughts and ones, or was it some form of assembly language?
I should have mentioned that.
Yeah.
Good point. The first high-level language is reckoned to be Mark 1, Ferranti Mark 1 autocode, which was released for general use in March of 1954. And from that sprang other autocodes and allegorical Fortran shortly afterwards. Before that, and for most hardware, throughout the decade I'm talking about, it was machine code programming. Sometimes you had a symbolic assembler where you could put A for add, S for subtract, that sort of thing. But at worst, like on the Manchester Mark 1 computer and Ferranti Mark computer, it was all binary. You were dealing with teleprinted characters, and you soon got familiar with these 5-bit characters. I just cannot imagine how people managed to write and correct and debug programs at this primitive level, but they did. And again, who generally were more successful? I have an idea that the women programmers were, but I might be wrong.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Simon for a very, very fascinating insight into some fascinating ladies.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I just need to finish off with a couple of slides just to advertise a couple of our forthcoming. Oh, I won't go through Simon's computer slides. You'll be pleased to know. So, right, we've got coming up a couple of, well, three or four webinars. First one will be live video production, the journey to the cloud. David Atkins was going to give that on the 13th of March. That will be a hybrid event, I think. On the 9th of April, we've got Roger Ward, who's technical editor of the Institute of Telecoms Professionals. He's going to give a history of telecoms. That's on the 9th of April. Sometime in May, I do expect Somvik Day, who's a researcher at the University of York, to talk about AI in music. Haven't got a date for that at the moment, but I think Somvik will be talking about AI in music. And on the 4th of June, we've got Professor Andy Sutton from BT. He'll be talking about point-to-point microwave. We've got some other lectures that are in the pipeline for the rest of the year, so do watch this space. Our IET NGEX website is there. It's the link to that. If you click on that, you'll see something like this on the right-hand side. So these are just quick links to various parts of our website, how to contact us, where to find car park in Ipswich, the foothold for support for engineers. If you want to watch one of our event videos, you can click through. If you want a CPD certificate for one of our events, they're available. And there's previous event information. If you want to contact our committee, you've got that there. That concludes the talk here. And thank you again, Simon, for your time. And for those online, you may disconnect